exemptions that the State Ethics Commission allows for certain positions. And these are positions that have no governmental authority and or discretion in any governmental action. They do not interface with any kind of decision making, and they're allowed to be exempted from the requirements of the educational training and education requirements and the training requirements. So they include such positions as the election workers, the Parks and Recreation summer help, the public works snowplow drivers. The list that I'm just requesting to be exempted is completely what's under the guidelines of their implementation procedures. So I'm trying to establish that. That does require a vote of the Board of Selectmen to exempt all of these positions from taking the online training and receiving the summary of the conflict of interest law before we do start in on the next session of this.
Ken, the list you have here under the guidelines are examples. Are there other positions within town government here where this could be expanded to?
I would look into that. I wanted to get this approved first with you this cycle, and then look into exempting as many others that,
Yeah, that's what I would ask you to do,
Yes.
is get as many in front of us as you possibly
Yes.
can, exempted.
I agree.
Services, shouldn't, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there's other,
youth services, shouldn't they be excluded?
No, youth services is a committee, so that would not be allowed to be exempted, okay?
No, I'm talking the department.
The
You mean
department itself is a paid employee.
Then how do you exclude even summer hires and the plow people? I mean, they're
Well,
paid people.
the youth services director has governmental authority. She can make decisions on behalf of the department. She exercises judgment, you know.
I understand
The
Right.
participants and the volunteers, the kids that do volunteers, they
Right,
would actually be
They
exempted.
would be exempted.
They would be exempted.
They would be exempted.
The children who
youth-
do volunteer services
Correct,
around town.
correct.
Maybe I misunderstood
be
you,
exempted.
because I know they have summer help.
Yes,
You pay them.
yes. Same with Parks and Recreation.
Those people
They
that are
would be
paid for
exempted.
summer help,
Yes,
Be exempt.
they would be
they
exempted.
should
It's
be.
basically non-decision makers.
Exactly.
Seasonal intermittent help
Yes,
are all exempted, or would be exempted.
Yes.
subject to a
so
vote.
Erica, how is she? Why?
No, she has to comply.
she is an employee.
She has to comply.
Yes,
I'm just using an example, just to make sure I understand it.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So Steve, were you suggesting rather than
Yeah,
Could you-
anything tonight?
Could you
is
think
that we,
off, were you
just get-
thinking of any other positions at this time, Mr. O'Leary?
Not necessarily, but I was just, I mean, you have the list of all boards, committees, commissions, employees, things of that nature. I mean, if there's some,
But all of those positions have some sort of governmental authority. They do exercise, they either, you know, make decisions on their own or generally report to another board or committee with recommendations. So, I don't see that our normal,
can we get, and again, I haven't read this in total, I'll confess to that, but it's, but even those advisory type committees, which really have no governmental authority other than make recommendations to those bodies that do have the authority,
Mhm.
cannot be exempted? I would hope that they could be.
if they're making recommendations, even though they're not,
They have no say other than making a recommendation to the board, committee, or commission that will make the decision, or the administrator. Then, you know, why would they not be exempted under the statute? Because
I would pose the question to the Ethics Commission myself. I would have to do that.
I would have
Because
to
they
do it.
would make the determining decision. They instruct us to do that, that whenever we have a question as to whether or not a position should be exempted or could be exempted, we ask it of them first.
Yeah.
So I will do that.
Yeah, if you would, that'd be great,
Yep.
because I think that would maybe exempt some other boards, committees, or
It's a
whatever.
very time-consuming process in our office to distribute all of this and track
I
it.
know, it
Yeah, it's
costs more than
taken
we
on
make
a
in
life of
license,
its
it
own.
costs more than what we make in just printing up those ethics things,
Yes.
than what we made on hunting license and fishing license.
Yes, it does.
I just
It does.
let go
of it.
It's
Wait.
8 pages.
No, I just, no, it does, no.
Condensed.
No, it's, I mean, every time I run, I get that packet from them.
Don't forget, the law is so far-reaching that actually people who do business with us, contractors,
Some of them
supposedly
have to.
sign off on it also.
Correct. It depends on the circumstances. Again, if we contract with a specific individual, they are required to abide by the training and the educational requirements.
Let me just use like the committee we said, the FAC committee, you know, Financial Advisory Committee. It was just strictly an advisory committee looking at how we operate, how we do things, and come back with recommendations for consideration by this board or any other board, committee, commission, and town meeting to do something. They didn't have any,
Right, our water and wastewater committee.
right,
and
water and
that's a
wastewater committee, just looking at, studying at specific areas of concern and things that we need to look at going forward. But the final decision, ultimate decision makers are here or somewhere else, not that they
Right.
don't lie with that committee, other than this is what we're proposing for recommendation for your consideration.
But, you know, if I may be devil's advocate here, just for the purpose, they have to make a decision to advise,
Right.
okay?
Yeah, but it's
And
started
but we don't, we are being given information that we would not otherwise get on our, we haven't otherwise gotten on our own, so they can determine what comes before us.
That is correct.
All
Right.
right, so they determine what comes before us, and had we done it on our own, we might have chose something else, so
No, I know, but
they
there's
kinda
also
are
opportunities
influencing
for minority reports and
but they
advisory
are,
opinions.
they are influencing our ability to make a decision, and
That's true.
just a devil's advocate.
No, yeah. No, I know, but to me, this has always been a little too far-reaching. It's out of control. And I think if we
Well,
can,
that's why,
and
at
if we
least
can
this is a
assist.
step to scale
If
it
we
back a
can,
little.
and this is fine as far as whatever's already stated, the obvious, that's fine. But to me, if we could help the Ethics Commission to see their way clear to exempt, you know, the water committee, not the, but the advisory boards.
Right.
Who just strictly make recommendations to the decision-making bodies, that would be very far-reaching, not just for this community, but for other communities. And I think we should try and make a case for that if you could.
I certainly will make the inquiry, you know, because as I said, this was a step before we started this next leg of the distribution to at least get these positions exempted, but, you know, many of us clerks, you know, are looking at other areas to exempt because it is a massive undertaking, it
Yes.
really is.
Right.
And there are some areas that you
So
definitely feel.
Maybe you could even get your association to advocate for these types of,
We've been trying.
you know, exemptions and changes.
We have been trying. It's a slow process. It is a new branch of the government, you know, taking control of this. And so they have had a lot of interface with different groups on this issue. And so they're finding their way too. You know, these implementation procedures were revised from the first issuance, and they're allowing for these exemptions. So it's a step in the right direction. And as they get more and more inquiries from us, you know, they do review their procedures, and they are
It's
looking at it
difficult. It's
again. It's
difficult.
very slow
But it's
moving.
difficult for your office and even for the individual boards, committees, and commissions
It is.
to be in compliance.
It
And
is.
there's a question in my mind as to whether or not they should even have to comply. And if we can assist either by sponsoring, have our state representative sponsor legislation to force the Ethics Commission to look at it differently, or if your association, Clerks Association, has some sort of a resolution that you want to put forth for our consideration to endorse, you know, those types of things occasionally get heard. And, so, I'm in favor of any exemptions you can come up with.
So, getting back to what you're proposing is that we not make a motion tonight.
No,
we'll
no,
abide
no,
by-
no, no, not at all, not at all. No, embrace
You're
what's,
okay with two
embrace
bids?
what's being
Okay.
done, but also ask the clerk to
Okay.
look into these
I
other
wanted-
areas
I
and what
wanted
happens.
that to be clear. I
Yes,
wasn't
oh no,
sure.
absolutely, accept what we can as soon as possible.
Yeah.
It's a step in
Let's
the
Mr.
right
Prisco.
direction.
Mr. Chairman, I move to exempt from the State Ethics Commission's mandatory education and training requirements the positions listed under Sections 2B of the revised mandatory education and training requirement implementation procedures as revised and reissued on March 18, 2010.
Motion by Mr. Prisco, second by Mr. O'Leary. Further discussion? I don't hear any. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Thank you, Barbara. And you got
Okay.
one more.
One more, okay. Now, again, this is probably the most detailed of my presentations here tonight.
Just when we thought we had it.
This, let me start off by saying that this does not require action of the board if the board chooses not to. Okay, this is legislation under House Bill 1972, an act regulating elections and primaries. The Woburn City Clerk, William Campbell, proposed this legislation through his representative, and our representative, Brad Jones, is a co-sponsor of this bill as well, just for your information. What it was intended to do in the beginning, I think if you read my memo, was to allow the state of Massachusetts to be compliant with a federal regulation that requires that absentee ballots be mailed no less than 45 days ahead of a general election to our overseas military and citizens. And that is in order for them to be able to be processed in a timely fashion and received back to our office and counted for the election. Massachusetts is one of the few states that is actually in non-compliance with this when it comes to the state election every 2 years. That election is on the first Tuesday of November, and under state law, the primary is 7 weeks prior to that. So it is 49 days in advance in September. By the time any recount period takes place and recounts are finalized and certified, that process can take up to 2 additional weeks. And that's on a rushed schedule. But that, again, is mandated by state law. After that time, and only after that time, would the ballots be allowed to be printed and distributed to the city and town clerks for mailing. So we're well within this 45-day requirement to have the ballots available and mailed out to overseas voters and the military personnel and civilians. So the legislation at first was looking at a way to put us in compliance. 2 years ago, we were again in non-compliance in that election, and the Secretary of State came up with regulations that allowed us to be in compliance under an act called the Military and Overseas Voters Empowerment Act of 2009, which did permit the electronic transmission of ballots. So the Secretary of State, allowed us to receive a PDF file of the ballot. We could send it out either by fax or email attachment to any voters that so requested it. The stipulation on their part was that they had to sign a waiver to a secret ballot, because obviously the ballot was being marked and transmitted back electronically. And that meant that our office would be seeing how these persons marked, even though we would then place it in an envelope before it went to the polls. But nevertheless, it was not a secret ballot. And that's one of the rights of every individual who's voting, is to be able to vote by secret ballot. So in looking at that time period, certainly the primary could be moved back, and that is the first step in this process, and that's what the state has been encouraged to do. To date, we have not had any action taken by the Secretary of State to do this. So we know that, at this point, we're looking at another possible situation where we would be in non-compliance in 2012 with this regulation for the September and November elections. The March primary, we won't face that because we will have the ballots ahead of time, before the 45 days. So this process, the suggestion in the bill that was filed by Mr. Campbell was to put the primary on the first Tuesday in June. And he also looked at this in a broader picture and suggests in the bill to change the presidential primary from March to coincide with the state primary in June every 4th year. That would cut out one election and save costs both in personnel, and there are other portions of the bill that would eliminate certain races from that ballot, which in